The Lykovs did not immediately find themselves in Altai. The old believers, who had known each other for many years and lived in close proximity, and those who were in kinship with the Lykovs, said that they came to Siberia from the Nizhny Novgorod province and, having passed the Stone Belt, settled on the Erinat River, a tributary of the Tobol. I do not know the exact date of the Lykovs' arrival in Siberia, but from the stories of relatives we know that Karp Osipovich's great-grandfather was born in the Elyuterovsk district of the Tobolsk province. The first of the Lykovs to come to Altai were the cousins, Savin and Yefim. The Tobolsk province, where they lived for several decades, the Lykovs left under Alexander I. But the surname Lykov sounded much earlier in Altai. Compiling the list of fugitive people who are hiding in the stone of various ranks and who entered the Yosip with their families, perpetrated during the description of the Bukhtama tracts of 1792, Antashimista Lavrenty Fedonov adds Ivan Lykov, a former peasant of the Anuisk settlement, to the list of fugitives. Who he is, when and where he came from in Anuskaya Sloboda, whether he is a relative of these Lykovs, it is impossible to say now, and there is no need for this. Most likely a namesake. The Lykov brothers who came to Altai picked up the valley of the Isha River with the help of close acquaintances who had previously left here. It is a large right tributary of the Katan River. Isha is about 170 km long, and the basin area is over 3,300 square. Exceptionally fertile places. Fine soils, mixed forests and taiga wilderness, an abundance of fur-bearing animals and ungulates, in particular, the largest among real deer, the red deer and the Siberian roe deer, the latter was a great many. As for the fish, the Isha and its tributaries literally swarmed with these representatives of the aquatic kingdom. And the herbaceous vegetation in the Altai mountains. By the variety of species, the place is rare, and by the size of the plants it is not so easy to find such places. The horse, along with the rider, easily hides in the grass. In general, it must be said that in the northeastern Altai foothills, where the most humid places, gigantism is observed in the plant world. The height of the grass cover reaches 2 or more meters. Many types of herbs bloom for a long time, so the honey harvest is rich, and the quality of the local honey is one of the best. In addition, Gorny Altai and its foothills abound in many valuable medicinal plants. After all, it is very important to always have a natural pharmacy at hand for the treatment and maintenance of health. That attracted such places. It was not for nothing that the people said that where the old believers live, the places are rich. Kurjaks will not live in a bad place. The Lykovs settled in the village of Karagayka, located in the valley of a small river of the same name, a tributary of the Isha. This village was founded around 1800 by old believers who came from Russia and the Tobolsk province. We settled in quickly. With centuries of experience, taking into account almost everything that was required to create, first of all, stocks of food, fodder for livestock and horses and housing, all migrants working, as the people said, tirelessly in a short time created tolerable conditions for life. A little later, Savrian's son Yakov left Karagayka with his young wife and settled on the left bank of the Katan in the village of Nizhnyaya Kyancha, a Skaya Volist. Their relative Praskovia Lykova also settled there. These families are out of luck. Now it is difficult to say how they angered the authorities, what caused the persecution. It is only known that all the Lykovs were distinguished by their firmness in faith, courageous judgments and open statements about the Tsar and the Orthodox Church. Apparently, intemperance in conversations was the bone of contention, and at the very beginning of the 20th century, the authorities took up these families thoroughly, right up to the interim Governor-General. And on November 10, 1906, his order to the Beast Police Chief appeared, which said, for extremely vicious behavior, evict the peasants Kirill and Ilarion Isav and Yakov Severianovich Lykov from the borders of the Tomsk province. 6 more years later, the Tomsk Spiritual Consistory demands to immediately execute the Governor-General's decree of January 26, 1912 and to evict Praskovia Lykova from the Tomsk province. The Beast Police Chief fulfills this order, and these old believers disappeared somewhere in Siberia. Vasily Skorokodov, who came with the Lykovs to Altai, did not stay long in Karagayka. Having heard about the healing spring on Abakan, Vasily managed to visit it, got acquainted with the surrounding area, and here in the Bal Valley. Abakan, in the place where the river almost stopped its run, on the wide left bank chose a place to live. In the upper reaches of the Abakan, this is the only place where the river has formed a rather wide valley. It flows there so calmly that the movement of water is almost imperceptible. The hunters who visited these places called this place Silence. This was the name of the settlement founded by Vasily Stepanovich Skorokodov, who moved here with his family for a permanent residence, according to the old residents of those places. During the reign of Alexander i.e., other young families followed him, and soon the settlement of Tisha turned into a village. In the 90s of the X century, the son of Efim Lykov, Osip Efimovich, moved here with his family. Resettlement to the upper reaches of the Bal Abakan and the settlement of its valley took place from Altai. The route of movement was chosen as the most convenient and passed first through the valleys of the Bayer rivers, then along its right tributary, the Swan River, and, having overcome a relatively simple pass through the Abakan Ridge, in the area of Lake Sadranskoye descended into the Bal Valley. Abakan along its left tributaries Beshar Albas. Therefore, both in the village of Tishi and in other numerous settlements, almost all residents were from Altai. Their relatives remained in Altai, and the connection was constant. Inhabiting these taiga places, the old believers uprooted the taiga, cleared the mows, skillfully burned the slopes of the mountains facing the south, the so-called sunbaths. The burned out areas were overgrown with raspberries, Ivan tea and other melliferous plants. This made it possible to collect rich honey bribes, and each had small apiaries of 5 or 6 hives. Traveling hundreds of kilometers through the mountain taiga through passes, mountain rivers, swampy areas was a difficult, time-consuming and to some extent dangerous business. It was necessary to transport not only household items, but also grain for sowing, poultry, carpentry tools, agricultural implements, overtake cattle, in short, everything necessary so that upon arrival at the chosen place, you could calmly arrange your life. And all in a packway. There are no roads, only paths. Sometimes we moved with small children and even babies. Naturally, it is impossible to transport everything at one time, so I had to make several trips. They settled where they liked it, where, in modern terms, it was possible to conduct a complex economy. Experienced people, they accurately selected places for settlement, having previously studied the soil. The study mainly consisted of rubbing her in the palms, and this was enough to determine her fertility. Visual inspection of the area also made it possible to determine the possibilities of keeping livestock and apiaries. Well, the taiga and the dense network of mountain rivers and lakes provided everything else. They did not forget about the soul. In addition to the indicated properties of the area, they tried to build a house, where it was more beautiful, where there is more sun, so that the soul rejoices. I remember once in a conversation my friend's father, Parfenty Filomonovich Kazanin, when I asked where and how they initially stayed when they moved to another place, smiling, said, "They settled under the fir. Without disturbing the natural balance, they cut down houses and outbuildings. Dead cedars were cut for the floor, ceiling, jambs and the device of the beds. Light, soft cedar wood lends itself well to processing. In addition to these qualities, which is very important during construction, cedar has a pleasant smell and a beautiful pale pink color. Damp-growing cedars were not chopped, there was enough dead wood and windbreak." The old believers understood perfectly well that cedar is not only wood, it is a high-calorie nut that is consumed by almost all animals and birds living in the taiga. Consequently, where there is a cedar, there is an abundance of fur-bearing animals, hoofed and game birds. Thus, the taiga complex was a stable support in creating a healthy life. Pine nut was one of the most important food products, given by the nature of the taiga. Children in old believer families grew up face to face with nature and, like no one else, learned its laws from an early age. Spring floods, thunderstorms, heavy rains, landslides in the mountains, forest fires, hurricane winds, snowstorms, avalanches and severe frosts, all this has been seen and felt from an early age. And already at an early age they understood and knew where, when and what to fear and how to behave in any natural phenomenon. Plus, every day, varied peasant labor made these people physically strong, smart, with a special grasp and reaction to any surprise. The children of Osipovich grew up in such an environment, and did not differ in anything special from their peers. In total, his family had 9 children, and by seniority they were located as follows: Darya, Stepan, Karp, Anna, Evdokim, Nastasya, Alexandra, Theoktista and Kionia. The last 4 daughters died as children from various diseases. Having matured, the young guys tried to get to know the taiga expanses, visit other places where people live, see cities, and stay with relatives. And the communication was frequent. All of them had horses, so there were no problems. We chose the time, saddled the horses, and set off. Well-fed, hardy horses covered tens of kilometers of mountain taiga during daylight hours, overcoming passes, mountain rivers and other obstacles. Taiga paths were in excellent condition in those years. It was a time when the entire vast territory of western Siberia, especially its south, was quite densely populated. Almost all places where it was possible to run a household were developed, and this resettlement gradually continued. The settlements were in 1 yard, in 2 or 3 yards, small settlements. There were hundreds of thousands of such villages and villages. In a word, it was a dense network of settlements. While exploring new places, we tried to preserve nature as carefully as possible, knowing full well that taiga vegetation, water are the main companions of well-being. Each farm had horses, cattle, sheep, sown area, etc. I must say that these were mostly strong farms. The peasants tried to acquire high-yielding cows, hardy horses, were constantly engaged in selection. They bought, exchanged with each other, and thus raised highly productive livestock, raised high grain yields. And Siberia has never known hunger. When asked if there is enough grain for a year, from harvesting to harvesting, any peasant could answer. And we never saw the bottom at the bottom of the barrel. Susek was a separate compartment in the barn, where the grain harvested from the fields was poured. Siberia has never had either landowners or serfdom. Siberia was the largest supplier of grain, meat, oil, wool and other agricultural products not only to the domestic market of Russia, but also to European markets. Russia sold hundreds of thousands of tons of butter to Europe alone and received almost as much gold for it as was mined in the country. The well-organized Union of Butter Artels of Siberia was engaged in the production and trade of butter. Everyone knows about the largest annual fairs in Russia, which attracted buyers from many countries in Europe and Asia. They knew that the agricultural products of Russian peasants are one of the best in the world, especially products from Siberia. All peasant families were large. 5-7 children are common. The improvement of peasant life especially sharply went up in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Perhaps these were the best years of the Russian peasantry in Siberia. Low stable prices made it easy for peasants to purchase agricultural machinery, which significantly increased labor productivity. In the newspapers of the pre-revolutionary period, one can find articles that spoke of the extraordinary rise of agriculture, industry and population growth, especially in Siberia. Some articles reported that the world community is concerned about the unprecedented growth of the Russian population in Siberia, which could affect food shortages and reduce supplies to Europe. These panicky articles had nothing to do with reality. In Siberia, many times more could live freely than they lived, and even more could increase the amount of agricultural products produced, and feed not only Russia, but also half of Europe. But a lot has changed with the advent of Soviet power. All estates were abolished, terrible persecutions of religion began, expressed in the plundering and destruction of churches, the physical destruction of priests by hanging and executions, and not only Orthodox, but also shamans, etc. All this was done deliberately and purposefully, with a written instruction from the authorities. How could the peasants, the bulk of the population of Russia, mostly religious, react to such vandalism? Of course it's negative. Fearing reprisals, people hid, quieted down. I must say that when the Tatar-Mongol invasion swept through Russia in a terrible whirlwind, then, according to historians, the oppressors did not destroy a single Orthodox church, cathedral, did not trample the faith of people into the mud. With the advent of such a new Bolshevik regime, dictate began. They took away the bread from the peasants, sometimes not leaving the family for food or seeds. The hungry time has come. A deadly fire hurricane swept through the civil war, leaving behind numerous bands of marauders and robbers. After the Civil War, however, there was a short period of time when the peasants were left alone, and they, yearning for the land, took up the usual peasant labor. It was nep, many later said that it was a good time. We worked with Joe. Nobody intervened, and there were no restrictions on anything. On the contrary, the local authorities kind of urged on and forced to sow more and increase the number of livestock. But this did not last long. The people were worried when ominous rumors spread that everything would be common. One question especially worried the peasantry: collectivization. Discussing the issue that worried everyone, allegedly they will select and socialize horses, livestock and even poultry, everyone was in some bewilderment. In the second half of the 20s, this was the most pressing topic. People were lost in conjectures, many did not understand and could not believe these incomprehensible rumors. Collectivization was rapid. The main task is to unite all peasants without exception into collective farms, the so-called collective farms. And not only people, but also livestock, cows, horses, agricultural machinery, etc., regardless of anyone or anything. All this was done almost in an orderly manner. For refusing to enter the collective farm, all the so-called kulaks, part of the middle peasants, were deprived of everything, evicted from their own homes and exiled to Nurim. In essence, the kulaks and middle peasants were the most laboring part of the peasantry. In Russia, from time immemorial, people have united in artels, brigades on a voluntary basis, with a targeted direction. These were fishing, carpentry, trade and different types of cooperatives. And such a forcible unification of not only people, but also the means of production led to a terrible collapse of agriculture in the country, and the peasant life that had developed for centuries collapsed at once. And now, from the heights of bygone days, you wonder how this could have happened, who and how invented this reform. Why it was necessary to ruin agriculture, the basis and support of the state. It all looked like a return to serfdom. Collective farmers were not given passports, were not allowed to move anywhere, etc. Serfdom existed for 268 years, from 1593 to 1861. There were still some old people who remembered the difficult time, and especially for them, such a setting of the case was, to put it mildly, surprising. It must be admitted that the problems of the Russian peasantry have not really been resolved to this day. Maybe someone will someday muster up civil courage and write a true history of the Russian peasantry. And I think now, did the great Russia really need only a Stolypin? Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video, and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafya Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching. The first time I visited the Lykov family of old believers, who had lived for many years in the remote taiga in complete isolation from people, in October 1980. In extremely difficult conditions, almost with bare hands, they withstood and survived. Life has put on a cruel, but very interesting from many points of view, experiment, which once again confirmed the enormous capabilities and reserves of the human body and spirit. At the time, the Lykov family consisted of 5 people. 3 years have passed. From Peskov's publications in Komsomolskaya Pravda, the whole world learned about the unusual and largely tragic fate of this family. Many changes have taken place in their lives in recent years. The saddest thing is that 3 of the Lykovs, Dmitry, Savin and Natalya, quickly, one after the other, died. What happened? From what? How to save the lives of the rest of the Lykovs? These and many other questions worry thousands of people. And so we again go to the Lykovs, to the remote Sian corner, Taiga dead end, as Vasily Peskov called this place not very well. Our second stay with the Lykovs was longer than the first in 1980. It was 2 weeks, from 17 to 30 August 1983. Some of the impressions from this and subsequent expeditions are described in the notes I made along the way. August 13, 1983 we left by train from Krasnoyarsk to the city of Abakan. The composition of the expedition: writer Lev Stepanovich Sherepanov, our leader, artist Elvira Viktorovna Motakova, Dr. Nikolai Mikhailovich Kudima, and the author of these notes. On the train, the conversation kept returning to the Lykovs, and Lev Stepanovich and I, who had already visited them in 1980, have to answer many questions from our comrades. Nikolai Mikhailovich, as a doctor, was primarily interested in medical problems. I remember that at the time I was very surprised by the fact that the Lykovs did not use table salt in their diet. But it is known that sodium chloride takes an active part in life support, and its lack can lead to severe changes in the body up to mental disorders, loss of consciousness, acute cardiovascular failure and human death. The Lykovs' medical examination last time was hampered by our short stay with them, 2 days, and, of course, by the fact that their faith, old believers, sharply limits contact with worldly people. Therefore, those research methods that are usually used by doctors, palpation, percussion, auscultation, not to mention instrumental methods and taking blood and urine tests, were not applicable in this setting. I had to confine myself to purely external perception and finding out the anamnesis, history of life and illness. At the time, the Lykov family consisted of 5 people: father, Karp Osipovich, 84 years old, sons, Savin, 55 years old, Dmitry, 44 years old and daughters, Natalya, 50 years old and Agafya, 39 years old. This age was recorded by me from the words of the Lykovs themselves. In appearance, they all look 10-15 years younger. Everyone's height is below average. The tallest is Karp Osipovich, about 156-158 cs. The lowest is Agafya, 148-149 cs. The physique is correct, proportional, no congenital and acquired deformities and defects were determined. Rapid mobility and increased elasticity of movements of all Lykovs, as gymnasts or acrobats, were noted. For example, Karp Osipovich, at his advanced age, freely took out a fallen object from the ground, without bending his knees. Everyone's gait is free, relaxed, somewhat, especially for daughters, mincing, probably this way it is easier to walk in the mountains among which they live. There were no clinical signs of hyponatremia, low sodium content, which could be assumed given the absence of table salt in the diet. The front teeth of all Lykovs were preserved, on them there was the deposition of stones, they did not have the habit of brushing their teeth. Karp Osipovich's speech is correct and understandable, the rest of the Lykov speech articulation is somewhat impaired, which is not due to the presence of any defects in the maxillofacial and respiratory apparatus, but, probably, to the lack of great conversational practice and prolonged reading of prayers in a certain style and rhythm. In the mental state of the Lykovs, no deviations were noted. They are balanced, affable, benevolent, talkative, inquisitive, reasoning logically. Immediate, like children, with the exception of Karp Osipovich, funny, especially Dmitry and Agafya. Everyone has a good memory, especially Agafya. The Lykovs are well adapted to the harsh conditions of the Siberian taiga. With us, they walk barefoot at a temperature of -3-5 degrees, felt free at this temperature in light clothes made of hemp fabric, dug potatoes with their bare hands from under the snow. From the stories it was found out that the Lykovs were sick mainly from injuries, sometimes there were abscesses, probably associated with skin damage and pollution, and colds, teeth ached. The Lykovs are treated with herbs, livestock, honeysuckle, blueberry, from the stomach, lingonberry, from the head, nettle, from gravity and blows, plantain and yellow flowers, from abscesses. The Lykovs' physical fitness and endurance are high. This is evidenced by the huge amount of work done by them, and our individual observations. So, for example, when Karp Osipovich accompanied us from the lower hut to the upper one, the road went almost all the time up a steep mountain, he spoke freely, while the members of our expedition were drenched in sweat, at sub-zero temperatures, and due to shortness of breath they could not pronounce the words. The Lykovs ate twice a day, taking quite a lot of food at a time. Their food usually consisted of boiled potatoes, in uniforms, the chowder from a handful of wheat, turnips and unpeeled potatoes. Fish, grayling, was used infrequently, boiled and dried, meat very rarely, when it was possible to catch a deer or a moose in a trapping pit. Natural cedar nuts or cedar juice, crushed pine nuts with water were widely used. Bread is a mixture of flour and crushed potatoes. They did not drink tea, they did not use boiled water. They do not use tobacco and alcoholic beverages, they are prohibited. They don't have baths, they don't know soap, only sometimes they rinse their hands with water, more purely symbolic. August 14th. We arrived in Abakan. On the same day, we took a bus to the village of Tashtip, 155 km. Overnight at the hotel, Tashel, translated from Kakas, mountain. August 15. In the morning immediately to the airfield, and at 10:44 am by plane and -2 flew to the Volkovsky area, where geologists are exploring an iron ore deposit. Under the wing of the plane there is a majestic picture of the boundless taiga. Gradually, the mountains increase in height, and now in some places snow-covered loches sparkle. Lakes are visible, small and large. But the most beautiful and largest, of course, Black Lake, rich in fish. During the flight, more than an hour, there were practically no villages, only a few houses flashed by on Koryachi Kluyuch, a mineral spring with healing water and mud, about which legends are told. Its healing power has long been known, but it is difficult to get to it, and the construction of a resort on it is probably a matter of the distant future. At 11:50 am. The plane lands at the Geologists airfield located on the Abakan spit. In a straight line to Tashtip it is about 200 kilometers. We were met by Anatoly Ivanovich Lomov, a drilling foreman, our old friend from the expedition in 1980. Memories, exchange of news, and, of course, we hastened to find out how the Lykovs are doing. From the story of Anatoly Ivanovich, we find out that Dmitry, Savin and Natalya died in October-December 1981. They were buried in logs hollowed out of wood. The cause of their death, obviously, we have yet to clarify in a personal conversation with the Lykovs, who survived. When geologists offered to give pills to Savin and Natalya, the grandfather said that everyone lives as long as God let him go, and refused treatment. Karp Osipovich's nephew came to the funeral with his son. They persuaded Karp Osipovich to move to the Altai territory, to the forestry where they live. Those who want to work in the leshas, and those who do not want to do their own business. The authorities do not oppress, said the nephew. However, Karp Osipovich refused to leave. According to Agafya, Dmitry refused the sacrament before his death. What is it? Protest? Recently, disagreements have appeared in the Lykov family. The grandfather complained that his sons did not obey him. The new hut was mainly made by the sisters. According to Lomov, when visiting geologists, Dmitry delayed the time of leaving. He did not want to leave people. At the geologists, all the Lykovs have already slept on beds, and not on the floor, as 3 years ago. We walked freely around the village, even alone. Dmitry especially enjoyed watching the sawmill work. At the next visit to geologists, Karp Osipovich watched Color TV, waved his hand and said, "One thing is pampering, however." According to Lomov, many people have already visited the Lykovs in recent years, a group of tourists from the Altai territory, relatives, a nephew of retirement age with a son, a brother-in-law, about 75 years old, some pious, 3 people from Kazan University, recorded their dialect and said that they were from the northern Urals. About the speech of their grandfather, a group of school children came on foot across the ridge, and there were several other people. In July 1983, journalist Vasily Peskov visited the Lykovs and stayed for 2 days. Someone in a parcel sent the Lykovs, the Sistine Madonna, by Raphael, a clipping from the magazine. Agafya looked carefully and said, however, "Not of our faith," and did not take it. Madonna still hangs on the wall in one of the geologists' houses. Lomov says, "I'm waiting for Karp Osipovich in his hut." Finally he appears. He walks, carries a half bucket of podanka, fallen cedar cones, and grumbles, "Here he is attached, he follows me all day." It's about the bear. The grandfather collects cones in a heap and goes to another cedar to collect the next one, so that he can then throw everything into a bag at once. And the bear is right there. It rakes up cones with its paws and eats them with pleasure. Or one more episode. Grandfather walks in felt boots on melted snow, puddles and water. And under the roof he has 4 pairs of rubber boots, a gift from geologists. They ask him, why in felt boots and not boots? Answers, and so it is softer. According to Lomov, Karp Osipovich's relatives condemn him for leaving the world and his children have no families. August 16. We were waiting for a helicopter at the Volkovskoye area to take us closer to the Lykovs. The helicopter did not arrive. We tried to fish in Abakan with a rod and sled. Caught nothing. According to geologists, there are no fish in the river this year. We spent the night at the geologist's house. August 17th. In the morning a Mi-8 helicopter arrived. We load backpacks, sleeping bags, received the last instructions from Anatoly Ivanovich how to go to the Lykovs from the swamp, the helicopter landing site. Another person is flying with us, Vyacheslav, an archaeologist from Odessa, who has a few free days and he certainly wants to visit the Lykovs. Mi-8 spins its 10-meter propellers and heads up the Abakan River. In 10 minutes the arable lands and houses of the Lykovs flashed behind the window, first the lower one, and then the upper one, to which we will have to go. Remember the direction. The helicopter soon hovers over the swamp and drops to 1.5 to 2 meters. Endless hummocks, between which water is visible. We drop our things and jump out ourselves. The whirlwind from the screws bent the grass, tearing off our caps. The helicopter takes off and goes back along the canyon of the Abakan River. Immediately there is a deafening silence. Jumping over bumps, we drag our things to the edge of the forest near the swamp. We divide the load into 2 parts. We hang one higher in the tree so that the animals, don't get it. We take the other with us and go to the Lykovs along a barely noticeable path. We walked for about an hour and went to the upper hut in the Golden Valley, as we called it in October 1980, when we first saw the autumn larch bathed in the sun in gold. Agafya's curious face peeped out of the hut and disappeared. The new meeting with the Lykovs was cordial. Agafya remembered that we were with them in the fall. Karp Osipovich remembered Lev Stepanovich's scribe Lenti, and me as a doctor named Georgi. They do not know the name Igor, not in their holy writings, so they called me Yegor or Georgi the Victorious, as Agafya jokingly said. As 3 years ago, they immediately began to regale us with potatoes and pine nuts. Karp Osipovich pointed to a place where you can stop and make a fire. Vasily Peskov and 3 linguists from the Kazan city have already stopped at this place, as Karp Osipovich said. We smashed one tent, put our things in it and went back to the swamp for the things we had left. We returned by 16 o'clock. We talked with the Lykovs, read the letters that are sent from all over the Union. The addresses to which these letters arrive are interesting. For example, South Siberia, Krasnoyarsk territory, Abakan, Abaza village, Tefny deadlock, from Komsomolskaya Pravda. Lykov Karp Osipovich. Abakan. Settlement of Geologists, Geologist Erafi. Past the taiga deadlock. Lykov Karp Osipovich. Agafya answers the letters, tracing old Slavonic letters in large handwriting. I ask her to write something in my notebook. He takes a ballpoint pen and clearly writes, Igor Pavlovich Nazarev of the month of August is the 4th day from Adam of summer 7491, Pisav Agafya. The letters, of course, are Old Church Slavonic. The numbers are written in letters, as it was previously accepted. For example, the number 4 was written with the letter D, and the chronology is old. I say great thanks. And praise for the beautiful handwriting. Agafya blushed with pleasure and, at the request of the rest of the members of our expedition, diligently writes her autograph in her notebooks, making the same mistake everywhere. Instead of writing, she displays Pisava. Anasi, Karp Osipovich's nephew, sent them the 70s. Agafya and then Karp Osipovich read from him a prayer about George the Victorious, wishing that he would save us from the bear. They gave Karp Osipovich a big knife and candles. I took it. He thank you. In the evening, the owners came to our fire and treated us to pine nuts. When several nuts fell to the ground, Karp Osipovich gathered them all together. They get hard. In dealing with us, the Lykovs no longer have the wariness that was noticeable on their last visit. They became simpler and calmer. Probably, they are already accustomed to people and many new things, information, and this does not cause them a state of stress, but only arouses curiosity and interest. They are already free to take various objects from our worldly hands. Agafya retains a childlike spontaneity, although it has somewhat diminished. She is very critical of everything. For example, he speaks of Savin's unnecessary stubbornness. He uproots the stump and drags him alone, but no one needs this. When he could barely walk, she said to him, "Do not dig potatoes, you will overstrain, you will die, and nothing will be needed." Didn't he obey? He crawled on the ground and dug. That turned out badly. According to the Lykovs, or as they say, Dmitry, was ill for a short time, about a week, and died on September 19, 1981 from a cold. Savin was seriously ill for about 2 months and died on December 7. At this time, he could not even leave the hut, his back ached, there was a chair with blood. Natalya caught a cold. Before her death she was suffocated, she was crushed, strangled, very tormented, died on December 17, 1981, according to the old calendar. Talking about the illness and death of her brothers and sisters, Agafya withdraws into herself, slows down, her speech slows down, her words are quiet, clearer than usual, uniform, with pauses, her eyes look into herself, sits motionless, no facial expressions, she all in memories, in those hard days, re-experiencing everything. The story is detailed, with many details. Occasionally Karp Osipovich supplements Agafya's sad recollection with short phrases. I listen carefully, try not to miss anything, analyze. Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafya Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching. Take a look at the middle of Siberia on the map, the space lying by the Yenisei River. This region, called Krasnoyarsk, has many natural areas. In the south, where Abakan flows into the Yenisei, no worse than in the Astrakhan steppes, watermelons, melons, and tomatoes ripen. Siberian Italy, they sometimes say about these places. In the north, where the Yenisei is already turning into the sea, reindeer get scanty food under the snow and people live exclusively on what can be obtained from reindeer breeding. Thousands of kilometers from south to north, steppe, forest steppe, wide taiga belt, forest tundra, polar zone. We write a lot about the development of this region. And it has already been mastered fairly. But is it any wonder that there are also bearish corners, white spots, inevitable and untouched places? The place of our interest lies in the south of Siberia in Caucasia, where the Altai mountains meet the Sayan ridges. Find the initial tail of the Abakan River, put a mark on its right bank as a keepsake, this is the place we were striving for and from where we had difficulty getting out later. In its young years, the earth was pleased to mix, to confuse the mountain ridges here, that the place became extremely inaccessible. There is no road or even a bearable path here. A barely perceptible trail hidden by the taiga is suitable for communicating strong, hardy people and even then with some risk. From the report of the geological expedition. To penetrate here you need to overcome several barriers, each of which becomes higher and steeper as you go deeper, we read in another report. In Siberia, rivers have always served as the safest path for people. But Abakan, born in these parts, is so restive and so dangerous that only 2 or 3 daredevils, old-timers hunters on boats, long as pikes, rise up the river close to the source. And the river is completely deserted. The first of the settlements, the village town of Abaza, lies 250 kilometers from the point we set. I'll run ahead and tell you. Coming back from the taiga, vegetable garden, we got into a bad weather and settled for a long time in the village of Geologists, waiting for the helicopter. Everything you could do in the rain while idle was experienced. We took a steam bath 4 times, went to the taiga to drill camps several times, collected blueberries, took off chipmunks, caught grayling, fired a pistol into a tin can, told all these stories. And when it became too much, they gave a hint about the boat, which was docked in the backwater of Abakan. A boat, said the geologist, the head of the exploration. And if the journey ends with a mourning frame and the signature group of comrades? What is it to you, but they will pull me to the prosecutor. Nikolai Ostinovich and I retired in embarrassment. But on the 10th, it seems, a very rainy day, the word boat slowly surfaced. Okay, said the boss, let's take a chance. But I will sail with you. And we swam. 6 people and 300 kilograms of cargo, a photographic chest, a barrel of gasoline, a spare motor, poles, an axe, life belts, raincoats, a bucket of salted grayling, bread, sugar, tea, everything was contained in a battered oboza boat. At the stern of the engine sat Voska Denisov, a driller, a dexterous, experienced guy, but still only a candidate for that limited number of fellows confidently passing the entire Abakan. Fear has big eyes, and perhaps the danger was not as great as newbies think. But the sky has repeatedly seen us like a sheepskin in the literal and figurative sense. In the narrow Taiga canyon, Abakan rushes, splitting into channels, creating heaps of washed-out trees, boiling on stone rifts. Our boat for this river was a wooden toy that could be thrown on rocks, or returned on a rapids, pulled under the rubble of logs. The water in the river did not flow, it flew. At times, the fall of the stream was so steep that it seemed like the boat was rushing down the foam escalator. At such moments, we were all silent, remembering our relatives and friends. But praise to the helmsman, nothing happened. Voska did not give a swing anywhere. He knew in which channel and at what second to turn, where to keep the speed at the limit, where to slow down, where to go on poles at all. I knew by name the boulders hidden under the water, on which chips were flying from many boats. As a transport route, the upper reaches of the Abakan River is dangerous and unreliable. But whoever once passed this road in the upper reaches will have a special starting point in understanding the wild, untouched beauty that people have touched so far only with the eye. Nature smiled at us. We sailed half the way in the sun. The mountains surrounding the river exuded the smell of July needles, the rocky, lilac shore was full of flowers, the sky was piercing blue. The turns of the river hid, then revealed a series of mysterious hills, and at any moment the river could give us a taiga secret, a bear, merle, Alp could come out onto a rocky spit, a capercaillie could fly over the water. Everything is changeable in life. For more than a week, we cursed the weather, which did not allow a helicopter to approach us. Now we were grateful to the bad weather, which pushed us into the arms of Abakan. The trip took 2 days with an overnight stay in the Taiga winter quarters. But it seemed to us longer. 250 kilometers, and not a single human habitation. When we saw the first smoke over the chimney from the water, everyone yelled as if on command, Abaza. The first village on Abakan at that moment seemed to us the center of the universe. This was our return from the Taiga after our meeting with the Lykovs. I began a short story about meeting people of extraordinary destiny from the end, so that one could feel and imagine how far they had gone from people and why they were discovered only by chance. We spent the night in Abaza and now we perceived this village town bordering the Taiga in a completely new way. He really was the capital of this region. Several hundred boats, similar to the one on which we arrived from the Taiga, were docked at the pier. They carry hay, firewood, mushrooms, berries, pine nuts here, they swim away to hunt and fish. On the bank of the pier, carpenters were building new boats. The old women came out here to sit on the benches, here in the evening couples walked, boys scampered around the boats, the guys tried and repaired the motors, but just like we, returning from the river, told us who saw what trouble we got into. The front gardens and vegetable gardens of cozy, solid Siberian buildings went straight to the pier. The apples were ripe near the houses. The gardens exuded the smell of some warm dill and sunflowers. The resinous aroma of neatly laid firewood came from the houses. It was Saturday, and a bathhouse was smoking near every house. On the wide, tidy streets of the town, the calves and the Zhiguli were peacefully sharing the grass and asphalt. The posters announced the upcoming arrival of a famous film actor. And on the billboard, we read a leaflet without any surprise, I am changing housing in Leningrad for housing in Abaza. Miners, loggers, geologists and hunters live here. All of them loyally love the cozy, picturesque Abaza. Such is the village town at the edge of the Taiga. We were looking for someone from those brave souls who went to the upper reaches of the river, to ask about the nature of those places, about everything that we did not have time or missed to learn from the Lykovs and geologists. We found the hunter Yuri Mogonnikov at home. And we sat with him the whole evening. Taiga is not poor there. A lot of things are growing, a lot of things are running, said the hunter, but it's still Taiga. In the mountains, snow falls already in September and lasts until May. It can fall out and lie down for several days in June. In winter, the snow is waist deep and the frost is under 50. Siberia. Here I heard about the Lykovs. And last year, for the sake of curiosity, I rose to their hall. When asked what he thinks about their life in the taiga, the hunter said that he loves the taiga, always goes to it with joy, but with even greater joy I return here, to Abaza. To conceal your life in the taiga without people, without salt, without bread is a big mistake. Old man Lykov himself, I think, understood this blunder. We also asked how the Lykovs were able to climb so far up the Abakan, if today, having two very strong motors on the boat, only a few would dare to compete with the river. They led the boat with a rope and on poles. Before, everyone walked like that, though not far. But Karp Lykov, I understand, is of a special ferment Kurgic. Fast. It probably took about 8 weeks that today I run in 2 days. And the helicopter took only 2 hours to get to the taiga hole. At 10 in the morning they got up, and at 12 they were already looking for the landing site. For 2 hours we flew over the taiga, climbing higher and higher into the sky. The increasing height of the mountains forced this. Gentle and calm in the vicinity of Abaza, the mountains gradually became harsh and disturbing. The sun-drenched green affable valleys gradually began to narrow and at the end of the path turned into dark precipitous gaps with silvery threads of rivers and streams. We go to the point. The commander of the helicopter shouted in my ear. Like glass in the sun, a river sparkled in a dark hole, and a helicopter went over it, down, down. We sank onto the pebbles near the settlement of Geologists. Until the Lykovsky dwelling, we knew, from here 15 kilometers up the river and then up the mountain. But a guide was needed. We had an agreement with him on the radio before our departure from Abaza. And now a hefty master driller, a hereditary Siberian Sadovir Osipovich, and his comrades, are throwing swamp boots, backpacks, and a saw wrapped in sacking into the open door of the helicopter. And we are again in the air, rushing over Abakan, repeating the bends of the river in a narrow gorge. It is impossible to sit at the Lykov's hut. She stands on the side of a mountain. And there is not, except for their garden, not a single bald spot in the taiga. There is, however, somewhere nearby a raised bog, which you cannot sit on, but you can hang low. Cautious pilots make circle after circle, trying on a clearing, on which water sparkles dangerously in the grass. During these visits, we see below the very same vegetable garden discovered from the air. Garden. Across the slope, lines of potato furrows, some other greenery. And next to it is a blackened hut. On the second call at the hut, they saw 2 figures, a man and a woman. Shielding their hands from the sun, they are watching the helicopter. The appearance of this machine means the appearance of people for them. We hovered over the swamp, left our luggage in the grass, jumped ourselves onto the cushions of damp moss. A minute later, without soaking its wheels in the swamp, the helicopter rose resiliently and immediately disappeared behind the wooded shoulder of the mountain. Silence. A deafening silence, well known to everyone who, like paratroopers, left the helicopter in half a minute like this. And here in the swamp Yerofi confirmed the sad news, which had already been heard in Abaza. There were only 2 people left in the Lykov family, the grandfather and the youngest daughter Agafya. 3 Dmitry, Savin and Natalya, suddenly, almost one after another, died last autumn. Before it happened, 5 of us went out if they heard a helicopter. Now they saw themselves, too. Discussing with us the reasons for the unexpected death, the guide mistakenly took the wrong direction from the swamp, and we wandered in the taiga for 2 hours, believing that we were moving towards the hut, but it turned out that we were walking just from it. When they realized the mistake, they considered it a blessing to return to the swamp again and dance from here. An hour of walking along the path, already known to us from the stories of geologists, and here it is, the purpose of the journey, a hut, which has grown into the ground at the window, black with time and rain, furnished with poles on all sides, up to the very roof heaped up with household rubbish, boxes and tools from birch bark, firewood, hollowed out tubs and troughs and something else that is not immediately clear to a fresh eye. In the residential world, this building under a large cedar would be mistaken for a bathhouse. But it was a dwelling that had stood here alone for about 40 years. Potato furrows running uphill with a ladder, a dark green island of hemp-on potatoes, and a field of rye the size of a volleyball court gave the place, which had probably been reclaimed by a lot of work near the taiga, a peaceful inhabited look. People, however, were not visible. There was no barking of dogs, no cackling of chickens, or other sounds common to human habitation. A wild-looking cat, suspiciously studying us from the roof of the hut, jumped and threw a bullet into the hemp. Moreover, the porridge bird flew up and flew over the foamy stream. Karp Osipovich. Is he alive? Called Agafya, going up to the door, the top jamb of which was below his shoulder. Something stirred in the hut. The door creaked and we saw an old man emerge in the sun. We woke him up. He rubbed his eyes, screwed up his eyes, ran his fingers along his disheveled beard, and finally exclaimed, "Lord Agafya." The old man was clearly glad to meet, but did not shake hands with anyone. Approaching, he folded his palms near his chest and bowed to each of those who stood. And we waited. It was decided that the fireman was a helicopter. And they fell asleep in sorrow. The old man also recognized Nikolai Ustinovich, who had been here a year ago. "And this is a guest from Moscow. A friend of mine. He is interested in your life," said Agafya. The old man cautiously bowed in my direction. "You are welcome, you are welcome." While Agafya was explaining where we sat and how foolishly we got lost, I could get a good look at the old man. It was no longer as homespun mossy as it was discovered and described by geologists. A felt hat given by someone made him look like a beekeeper. Dressed in pants and a shirt of factory fabric. There are felt boots on the feet, a black scarf under the hat, protection from mosquitoes. Slightly hunched over, but for his 80 years old enough hard and mobile. Speech is intelligible, without the slightest flaws inherent in age. He often says, agreeing iter. Which means, well. Slightly deaf, now and then he straightens his handkerchief near his ear and leans towards the interlocutor. But the look is attentive, tenacious. At the moment when the views of the harvest in the garden were discussed, the door of the hut opened slightly and Agafya ran out with a mouse, who did not hide her childhood joy from seeing people. Also palms joined together, bows to the belt. The machine flew. And there are no good people and no, she said in a sing-song voice, dragging out her words. This is what the blessed people say. And it took a little getting used to so as not to get lost in the tone in which they usually speak with the blessed. It is impossible to judge the age of this woman by her appearance. The facial features of a person under 30, but the color of the skin is somehow unnaturally white and unhealthy, recalling the sprouts of potatoes that had been lying for a long time in the warm, damp darkness. Agafya was dressed in a baggy black shirt up to her feet. Bare feet. On his head is a black linen scarf. The people in front of us were covered in coal spots, as if they had just been cleaning pipes. It turned out that before our arrival, they continuously extinguished the taiga fire, which was approaching their very dwelling, for 4 days. The old man led us along the path behind the garden, and we saw, the trees were charred, the burnt blueberry crunched under our feet. And all this in freestone throws from the garden. June, which floods Moscow with rains, was dry and hot in the local forests. When the thunderstorms started, fires broke out in many places. Then the lightning struck the old cedar, and she got busy, like a candle. Fortunately, there was no wind, the resulting fire was approaching the dwelling along the ground. We poured the fire with water, covered with branches, covered with earth. And he is getting closer and closer, Agafya said. They are sure it was God who sent them a saving rain. And today the helicopter was also spinning at his direction. The machine woke us up. When she flew away, and you did not come, you lay down again. We've lost a lot of strength, said the old man. It's time to untie the backpacks. Gifts, the oldest way to show friendliness, were promptly received. The old man gratefully held out his hands, accepting a work suit, a cloth jacket, a box with a tool, a bundle of candles. Having said what the word was supposed to, and politely looking at everything, he wrapped each gift with a piece of birch bark and put it under the canopy. Later we found there many products of our clothing and rubber industry and a whole warehouse of hardware. Everyone who came here brought something. We presented Agafya with stockings, fabric, sewing accessories, thimble. She happily showed her father a metal cup. Even more joy was caused by an apron made of chintz, a scarf and red mittens sewn by an experienced woman's hand. Wishing to please us, Agafya covered the handkerchief over the one in which she slept and extinguished the fire. And she walked like that all day. To our surprise, soap and matches were rejected. We can't do that. We heard the same thing when I opened a cardboard box with food delivered from Moscow. A little bit of everything: biscuits, bread, crackers, raisins, dates, chocolate, butter, canned food, tea, sugar, honey, condensed milk. Everything was politely stopped by two palms in front of us. The old man took only a can of condensed milk in his hands and, after hesitating, put it on the heap, for cats. With great difficulty, we convinced them to take lemons. You definitely need it now. After asking, where does it grow? The old man framed the hem of his shirt, but told Agafya to carry the lemons into the stream, let them lie there until evening. The next day we saw how the old man and his daughter, according to our instructions, squeezed lemons into a mug and smelled the crusts with curiosity. Then we received gifts. Agafya walked around us with a sack, pouring pine nuts into our pockets, brought a birch bark box with potatoes. The old man showed the place where you can light a fire, and, politely saying we cannot when asked to have a meal together, withdrew with Agafya to the hut to pray. While the potatoes were being cooked, I walked around the Lykovskoye estate. It was located at a carefully and, probably, not immediately chosen point. Away from the river and high enough on the mountain, the estate was safely hidden from any casual eye. The place was protected from the wind by the folds of the mountains and taiga. Next to the dwelling is a cold, clean stream. Larch, spruce, cedar and birch stands give people everything they could take here. The beast is not afraid of anyone. Blueberries and raspberries are nearby, firewood is nearby, cedar cones fall right on the roof of the house. Here is perhaps an inconvenience for the garden, not too gentle slope. But look how thick the potatoes are turning green. And the rye was already full, the pods on the peas were swollen. I suddenly stopped at the thought that I was looking at this hotbed of life through the eyes of a summer resident. But there is no train here. It is not an hour's journey to the nearest light, to a human handshake, but 250 kilometers of impassable taiga. And a person has not been here for 30 days, but for more than 30 years. What labor did you get bread and warmth here? Did you suddenly have a desire to gain wings and fly somewhere? Near the house, I carefully looked at the old trash. A spear with a large shaft and a homemade forge tip. A little hatchet worn out almost to the butt. A homemade axe, you can only chop off branches with it. Skis knocked out with a camas. Hose. Details of a weaving mill. A spindle with a stone spindle. Now all this has been dumped unnecessarily. Hemp was planted most likely out of habit. They brought fabrics here, they won't wear out for a long time. And a lot of other things are stuck under the roof and lies under a canopy near the stream, a coil of wire, 5 pairs of boots, sneakers, an enamel saucepan, a shovel, a saw, rubberized pants, a roll of tin, 4 sickles. It's good you won't live a century. Karp Osipovich, who came up in his felt boots, sighed inaudibly. Taking off his hat, he prayed towards the 2 crosses. The kingdom of heaven, they no longer need sickles or axes. The old man showed me a storage shed on 2 high pillars, to protect food from mice and bears, a cellar where potatoes were kept, a hearth of stones at the very threshold of the hut, where Agafya was cooking dinner on a small fire. I got a good look at the roof of the shack. It was not sketched out in disarray, as it seemed at first. Large blocks looked like gutters and were laid like tiles on European houses. The nights in the mountains here are cold. We didn't have a tent. Agafya and her father, watching how we were going in what God sent to lie down near the fire, invited us to spend the night in a hut. The first day's impressions must be finished with its description. Bending under the jamb of the door, we found ourselves in almost total darkness. The evening light was blue only in a window the size of 2 hands. When Agafya lit and secured a torch in the light that stood in the middle of the dwelling, one could somehow make out the interior of the hut. The walls were dark even with the torch, the soot of many years did not reflect light. The low ceiling was also charcoal dark. Poles for drying clothes hung horizontally from the ceiling. Flush with them along the walls were shelves lined with birch bark utensils with dried potatoes and pine nuts. Down along the walls were wide benches. On them, as could be understood by some rags, they slept and could now sit. To the left of the entrance, the main place was occupied by a wild stone stove. The pipe from the stove, also made of stone tiles, faced with clay and strapped with birch bark, exited not through the roof, but from the side of the wall. The stove was small, but it was a Russian stove with a two-stage top. On the lower step, on a bed of dry marsh grass, the head of the house slept and sat. Above, large and small birch bark boxes were again piled up. To the right of the entrance stood another stove on legs, a metal one. The bent pipe also went away from it through the wall. In winter it was possible to freeze wolves here. Well, they cooked this potbelly stove for them. I am surprised how they dragged, said Yerofy, who had spent the night here more than once. In the middle of the dwelling was a small table, worked by an axe. That's all there was. But it was crowded. The area of the kennel was about 7 steps by 5, and one could only guess how 6 adults of both sexes huddled here for many years were in distress. The old man and Agafya talked without tension and with pleasure. But often the conversation was interrupted by their impulses to pray immediately. Turning into a corner where, apparently, there were icons invisible in the dark, the old man and his daughter sang prayers loudly, groaned, sighed noisily, fingering the hillocks of the ladders, the instrument on which the bows were canted. The prayer ended abruptly as it began, and the conversation flowed again from the point where it had been interrupted. At the appointed hour, the old man and his daughter sat down to dinner. They ate potatoes, dipping them in coarse salt. Eaters carefully collected grains of salt from their knees and put them in a salt shaker. Agafya asked the guests to bring their own mugs and poured cedar milk into them. The drink, prepared in cold water, resembled milk tea in color and was perhaps delicious. Agafya made it in front of our eyes. She ground the nuts in a stone mortar, mixed them with water in a birch bark dish, filtered them. Agafya had no idea of purity. The earthy colored rag through which the food was squeezed served the hostess at the same time for wiping her hands. But what could be done? We drank the milk and, giving Agafya obvious pleasure, sincerely praised the drink. After supper, questions about the bath somehow spontaneously arose. The Lykovs did not have a bath. They didn't wash. We can't do that, said the old man. Agafya corrected her grandfather, saying that she and her sister occasionally washed in a dugout trough, when it was possible to warm the water in the summer. They also occasionally washed their clothes in the same water, adding ash to it. Neither broom nor broom has ever touched the floor in the hut. The floor bounced underfoot. And when Nikolai Astinovich and I were spreading an army raincoat tent on it, I took a pinch of the cultural layer, to examine outside the door by the light of a flashlight what it consists of. The carpet on the floor consisted of potato husks, pine nut husks and a hemp fire. On this soft floor, without undressing, we lay down, putting our backpacks under our heads. Yerofy, stretched out to his full height on the bench, relatively soon announced with a snore that he was sleeping. Karp Osipovich, not parting with his felt boots, lay down, slightly breaking the grass featherbed with his hands on the stove. Agafya put out the torch and curled up, without undressing, between the table and the stove. Contrary to expectations, no one ran on our bare feet and tried to drink blood. Moving away from people here, the Lykovs managed, probably, to slip away unnoticed from the eternal companions of man, for whom the absence of a bath, soap and warm water would be prosperity. Or maybe hemp played a role. In our village, I remember, hemp was used against fleas and bedbugs. Already the window began to glow pallidly with the July morning light, and I still did not sleep. In addition to people, 2 cats with 7 kittens were found in the house, for whom the night is the best time to take walks in all the nooks and crannies. The bouquet of smells and the staleness of the air were so high that it seemed as if a spark flashed here by chance, and everything would explode, scatter in the sides of the logs and birch bark. I could not resist, crawled out of the hut to breathe. There was a big moon over the taiga. And the silence was absolute. Leaning my cheek against the cold wood pile, I thought, will all this be real? Yes, everything was real. Karp Osipovich came out to urinate. And we stood with him for a quarter of an hour talking about space travel. I asked, does Karp Osipovich know that there were people on the moon, walked there and rode in chariots? The old man said that he had heard about it many times, but he did not believe it. The month is a divine light. Who, except gods and angels, can fly there? And how can you walk and ride upside down? Taking a breath of air, I fell asleep for 2 hours. And I clearly remember a difficult, confused dream. In the Lykovs hut there is a huge color television. And on his screen, Sergei Bondarchuk in the image of Pierre Bezukov is holding a discussion with Karp Osipovich about the possibility of a man visiting the moon. I woke up from an unusual sound. Outside the door, Agafya and the old man were sharpening an axe on a stone. Even in the evening we promised the Lykovs to help in matters with the hut, the construction of which they began when there were 5 more of them. Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafya Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching.